If you have intense chemistry with someone who is not healthy for you in any other way, the relationship isn't going to work. Like if I just saw this meme that was like, just because someone is good for your whole doesn't mean they're good for your soul.
Oh, dude, I love that. Oh,
I know, it made me laugh.
The Self-Hype Podcast.
What is up, y'all? It's your boy Eli Vasquez, and welcome to the Self-Hype Podcast. This week we got a good one because we're talking sexy time, sex, intimacy, the no pants dance. You already know what it is. And we're doing that with the phenomenal Dr. Emily Jamia, who is a sex and relationship therapist based in Houston. She has helped thousands of people over the last 15 years to help them unlock that connection and passion with individuals. She has a book called Anatomy of Desire, The 5 Secrets to Create Connection and Cultivate Passion. And her book is sold everywhere, and also she has a podcast, and her work has been seen on Oprah and CNN and USA Today, so she knows what she's talking about. So let's dive in. Let's have some fun. Hello, Dr. Emily Jamia. Thank you so much for being a part of the Self-Hype Freaking Podcast. How you doing? How you feeling?
Hi, Eli. I am doing great and so happy to be here with you today.
Sweet. Yeah, me too. I mean, I'm excited to talk about this, especially with someone who is licensed and like you develop you're able to share such a topic that could bring up such an array of different feelings and emotions and tensions and deliver it in a way that is super digestible and able to jump on and follow along and better understand. So I'm so excited for everyone to be listening. We got a lot of ladies on here that are listening. So thank you so much for being part of this. But sweet. So, but first I want to hit on is like you being like a licensed therapist that focuses on intimacy, that focuses on sex. Like, I'm very curious on the origin story of this person. Like, were you just like all about these like sexy streets from the very beginning, or like, what's the journey? How did we even get here?
You know, in a way, yes. So I grew up in a small conservative town. But within my own family, my dad was an OB-GYN. So sex was never taboo in my house. It was like no big deal. I heard him on the phone all the time talking about all kinds of things. And it quickly became apparent to me as I was entering into adolescence that so many of my peers felt so much shame around their sexuality. They didn't know if their feelings were normal. And so they would talk to me about it, and I would always tell them like, yeah, of course it's normal, no big deal. And so I think I started giving sex advice long before I was actually a sex therapist. And then, fast forward, I'm in college studying psychology. I took a human sexuality elective, and it was the first time I realized that that was even something you could specialize within the field of psychology. And I found it fascinating because I think our sexuality is such an interesting window into the psyche. I mean, you learn so much about a person by asking questions about their sexuality. And obviously, it's such an important component of relationships. And then I learned that sexology was not a required course for a lot of marriage and family therapy programs. And I'm like, how is nobody talking about this? So I made it my mission to learn everything that I could. And, by the time I graduated with my master's, I was ready to set out and do my thing.
So they don't talk about the sexy time. It's not a requirement to like dive into this. Like, I feel like that's the most fun thing to do in a relationship. How is that not like discussed? That's
I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's still taboo in a lot of places. And I think a lot of programs just don't understand how important of a component that is within marriages and many relationships for that matter. So no, it's not a class that's a required course in a lot of programs even now.
That's super interesting because you hit on something that I really enjoyed. And it's like we could learn so much about one's psyche through sex. Like, and that just hits me because I'm like, God, I'm very self-aware. It's the Self-Hype Podcast for a reason. It's personal development, personal wellness. But sexuality is such a big part of that I could even see in terms of like how my attachment style is attached to that, or like from like dating to like in an intimate relationship and how that affects like me as a man. But I'm curious, I want to do a couple steps back where like you were confident, comfortable in the sexuality at an early age.
Yeah.
But you also grew up in like a conservative town. So like I'm from Indiana. It's conservative as hell too, and I grew up like with religion and stuff. So you don't talk about it. But I'm curious, you as like a young woman in that
Mhm.
adolescence, in those teenage years, how did you manage like that not having that shame? Because if you have a bunch of friends that are feeling that way, plus you're a young girl in this conservative town,
Mhm.
like I'm very curious, like how did you sustain? Because I know a lot of women do struggle with owning that and expressing themselves, and you adopted that at an early age. So I'm curious if you dealt with
Well,
adversity at all or
it
anything like that.
oh, of course, I have certainly, and, I've got other stuff from my past that probably shaped me that I've had to work through, but, I think so much of the early feelings we have around sexuality, which are typically placed there either by our families of origin,
Yeah,
religion, culture, society, those stick around. And so I
yeah,
was very fortunate to have a family system in which the feeling associated with sexuality and development was like, this is normal, it's healthy, it's okay. There was, permission, and but of course with healthy
wow,
boundaries. But yes, to your point, I work with countless people, both women and men, who grew up with, sex is wrong, sex is dirty, save it for someone you love, which is a very
right,
confusing message, or it's just never talked about, which makes it feel like there's this shameful element to it. So that can be really hard and take time to peel away and
yeah.
replace with, more positive, healthy feelings.
What is up? So I know you're enjoying the episode, but I just want to ask you a question. What if we worked together? What if we jumped on a live call? What if you told me all the goals and aspirations you had in the dating game, and I created a customizable, non negotiable list for you to help you filter out all the F boys and ratchet, dusty potatoes? What if you got to be a part of a program that was designed to know the mindset of a man while also knowing how to do the inner work of regulating your nervous system while sustaining boundaries and normalizing rejection from dating apps all the way to defining the relationship? What if you got to jump on live calls with me every 2 weeks of accountability, or being a part of a group chat with you and members from all over the freaking world where you could ask me questions whenever you want? That is the inner work coaching program. And that is the program I want to offer you. It's my premier dating program where you get to work with me. And I promise you, in 90 days or less, if you do not improve your dating game, I will give you your freaking money back guarantee. Okay. And every new member that joins, this is very limited. This is for self hype listeners. But if you're a self hype listener and you join like in the next week, I'm going to give you a one-on-one call with me, an intro one-on-one call. And this is super limited. So if you're listening, jump on it. Link in the bio, link in the show notes, inner work coaching program where you get to work with me and you get extra podcast episodes, you get extra bonus content, and so much more. The inner work coaching program. Hopefully I see you there. Let's get back to the episode. What are we like getting wrong about sex? Like, what are the stigmas or myths that you see that you're just like, no, this is like, it doesn't have to be this way. So I'm curious, like, what are those commonalities in terms of like how we're viewing this wrong or doing, or what are those myths, or what are like the big ones that kind of get in the way that you see commonly?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Where do I start? But
That's true.
I
It is a
think on
lot.
a really broad scale, like we've already talked about the shame
Yeah.
associated with sex that so many people feel. And I think that's because, the US is rooted in very puritanical values. And there
Yeah.
was still, and still is today kind of a fight toward this, religious conservative value system. And that translates into sex and bodily autonomy. And so that's
Yeah.
really a strong feeling, I think that people feel. Now, the pendulum has shifted. I think younger generations are starting to feel more comfortable
Yeah.
exploring their sexuality. You're getting people who feel fine. It's like no big deal to be gay today,
Yeah.
like it was. And,
Yeah.
transgender movement has come a long way. And so people are feeling more comfortable in different sexual identities and
Yeah.
orientations. However, the biggest concern I have with people today, and I don't think this is being talked about enough, is that there's kind of this whole movement away from healthy sex and relationships. So it's like it used to be sort of this shame based thing that people did anyway. And lucky were the ones who released the shame and found this healthy, meaningful sexual connection.
Right.
But now, if we look at the younger populations, like early young adults, rather, people are not having that much sex. And
Yeah.
that's really concerning to me because I don't think that's healthy either. And so I'm really pushing people to not give up on love and romance and healthy sex, and see that as being a really important key for long-term health and well-being.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard about that too. And that's so interesting, right? Because it feels like we're in this more sexually open era where women are feel more liberated and they get like express themselves more.
Yeah.
Like I have like one of my boys is like, yeah, bro, I'm like ethically non-monogamous. I'm like, bro, you're just trying to holler at a bunch of chicks. Like, I'm like, sure, whatever, go on your journey,
Yeah.
but like, but it's more common that people are even using this verbiage. But I
Yeah.
do see statistics in that way that says we are
Right.
having less sex. So if
Yeah.
how are you being in your position, like what are some of the reasons for this? Because if we don't have this overbearing sense of Jesus that's looking down on us while we like
Right.
jerk off and and like we feel more open, yet no one's doing it, like why?
Yeah.
Like why the disconnect?
Oh gosh, I think a large part of it has to do with the internet and social media.
Mm,
My biggest concern is that we're not getting the rush of like the rush of dopamine and all the feel good chemicals you get from a sexual interaction these days doesn't compare to the rush of dopamine you might get from seeing how many people
wow.
like a post on your social media. And that's instant gratification. You don't have to depend on another person to give it to you necessarily. Of course, these people in this virtual world you've created, but there's this real move away from authentic, honest, true human to human relationships because it's all through this filter of social media and it's not real. And so
Yeah.
people haven't, younger generations haven't really developed the skill set they need to form these deeper bonds. And on top of that, they're more anxious than ever before.
Yeah.
I do think there's sort of this movement towards like toxic positivity where people are so afraid to feel any painful emotions, like God forbid they go through a heartbreak, that they would rather just not have a relationship at all.
Yeah.
And, when you numb out some of that bad stuff or avoid the bad the uncomfortable feelings, I don't like to label feelings as good or bad. They're
Yeah.
comfortable and uncomfortable. But when you shy away or you don't have the tools you need to equip with painful emotions, you're never going to feel the positive emotions
Yeah.
either.
Oh man, we're getting off more on likes than on like a connection with the other human being. That is
Yeah.
wild because you're right. We are flooded with all this dopamine
Yeah.
that like back in the day, yeah, that was that dopamine. You didn't have all this
Yeah.
noise and instant
Right.
gratification and all this. Like you looked
Mhm.
for love. So like I just think of like, was my grandma like getting a better high with other human beings than say,
But
where I'm at now?
assuming she didn't have all the shame associated with sex, she probably was. Because
Um,
when we are sexual with another person, especially when there is a close connection, an emotional connection there,
Yeah,
the flood of chemicals you get is so much better for you and feels
yeah,
so much better than these just kind of constant random hits of dopamine you get
totally.
from, social media and that sort of thing. And then you add on top of that, internet porn, which I am not anti-porn at all. I think porn can be
Oh,
used in a
thank God.
wonderful, healthy, responsible way, but like I think I'm quite a bit older than you, just but
Yeah,
judging by the looks. But I think about how I grew up and how exciting it was when you'd go to the movies with someone and you'd wonder if they're going to hold your hand or not, or but
yeah,
now these kids at the same age I was when that's happening have already seen all the hardest core porn out there. And
yeah.
so it doesn't seem as exciting because they've seen the more intense stuff.
Oh, 1,000%. Like, I'm jealous of my, like, younger cousins because they have all cell phones, and I didn't get a cell phone until like, I was in college, but, like
Mhm.
and even then, I couldn't go on, like, YouTube and, like, go on, like,
Right.
Hub and all these other, like, spicy sites and stuff. I was like I remember back in the day, and I feel like a forefather, like a pilgrim, like, when
I
it comes to
know.
internet porn, is like, I went on LimeWire, and
Yeah.
I had to
Yeah.
download a photo. So and I'm like
Yeah.
make sure my grandma was asleep because there was only one
Yeah.
home computer. Like there was
Right.
a lot of processes there. Now you just pick it up and just like receive
In
it
your
and
back
have that
pocket.
high.
Yeah.
So that is so significant. And in terms of my grandmothers, I think one did have that shame. The other one, I think, hooked up with one of the Jackson Five. She definitely did it. It was back in the day in Chicago. She went to the
Sure.
concerts and stuff. So good for her. She got that on the
Yeah.
belt.
Yeah.
But that's fantastic. So what I'm curious about is like say someone is trying to like say start their journey of taking that shame off or
Mm,
trying to be in more in tune of this like sexuality of themselves. Like, how should one, start that? Because there are so many anxieties, there are so many fears. There is a lot there, and also, is there shame in being vanilla? Because is that a because with all the sexiness out there, like I
yeah.
don't like this. I like eye contact and missionary and whatnot. I enjoy that. So I guess,
Yeah.
how do we start that process? And is not being kinky okay?
Okay. Oh my gosh, this is such a great conversation, and I was just having it with someone else recently. So, first of all, I think that one of the first things we have to do is a sexual values reassessment, and I have a
Oh,
whole exercise about this in my book.
mm,
But I don't think that a lot of people spend enough time really considering what values when it comes to sex and relationships still fit for them that were maybe put on them by their family, by their church, by the politicians, by culture, by society, really determining and discerning which ones of those fit and feel true and authentic for you and are going to give you a sense of happiness and purpose in life versus what maybe new values you need to consider and explore. And, so one of the first steps is identifying what doesn't fit, but then really exploring what you think does fit. And part of that is
mm,
talking to people who have different values or opinions or lifestyles from you so that you can see kind of what you think might work and not work. And then it's a little bit of a trial and error because sometimes you
mm,
don't know for sure how you're going to feel about something until you give it a go a couple of times. And so
yeah.
that's part of it as well. Now, to your point, is vanilla okay? Yes. And I'm
Mm,
so glad you asked about that because, on the one hand, it is wonderful that the conversation has opened and people feel safe to explore different kinks and
yeah.
fetishes. 50 Shades of Grey opened a lot of that up for people
Oh,
and
yeah.
awesome. It's nothing new. It's just something people are talking about more. But my concern is that people have become so intimacy phobic that they're looking for ways to again seek this intensity. Now,
Mm,
within a really loving relationship, those things can be wonderful and
yeah.
in they can be intimate and they can be intense, but you can also find a ton of intensity within vanilla sex. I mean, how
Mm,
many people have the bandwidth now to even just hold still for a moment
yeah.
and look at another person in the eyes and open themselves up into that really vulnerable space and slow
Yeah.
down. I think that we
Yes.
are running around all day long, multitasking more than we ever have. And then I get people who complain about being unable to focus during sex. And I'm like, because you've got split attention the whole day.
Yeah.
Yes, doing something wild and crazy and kinky can kind of give you that same split attention, exciting feel. But I think a lot of people lack the capacity or the attention span
Mm,
to just slow down and
wow.
hold their beloved and be tender and take their time, you know,
Oof. That
which is what a lot of women need in order to have an orgasm is more time. You
Yeah, that's so true. It goes back to that quick dopamine and the go, go,
Yeah,
go and the
yeah,
scroll, scroll, scroll. And it's like, this is us. We're
yeah,
connecting here. And
yeah.
I would almost like even see that like, oh, let's do this quick and dirty and hardcore and
Mhm.
this and that. Where's the intimacy in that? Where's the connection in that? And that does take
Right,
time. And if anything, that could be vulnerable. And some people like,
exactly.
that eye contact is deep. It also could be pretty hot. But yeah, it's that deep connection of taking that time that this is something that's significant, especially if in a relationship.
Oh, yeah,
Most definitely. So yeah, no, I'm glad you hit on that. I guess and I'm glad you like, I'm sure there's people listening that are like, well, they're gonna have this conversation, and I have to be kinky, and I have to do these things, and I have to do all this. But I feel I genuinely this is where I'm at,
yeah,
and so it's great that you are. Even me personally, I'm like, I grew up again, Indiana, grew up Catholic, and not that I'm Catholic anymore, but if it rains, I feel like I did something wrong. It's like it's still that kind of like it carries
I
with
know.
you a little bit. So
Yeah,
I feel
oh,
like
yeah.
yeah, in the bedroom too, it's like, I could explore here, but also I don't want to like feel ashamed for being loving what I love, I guess.
Yes.
So that's
Well, I
that's
mean,
great that you hit
just
on
as
that.
we shouldn't, like, slut shame people, we also shouldn't shame people because they,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, want a monogamous relationship and feel satisfied with more vanilla sex. perfect. I mean, whatever, who
Yeah.
cares? Let
Totally,
everyone
totally.
else find something that works for them.
So I'm curious in terms of like, okay, I'm like starting to date, or I started to date this person,
Okay.
and okay, maybe you just fall into having sex, and it's
Sure.
your first time, and you're kind of figuring out the whatnots and everything
Yeah.
else. And how does one? It could be maybe they are a little more on the kinkier, spicy side, and someone maybe is a little more vanilla. But like in terms of those initial kind of conversations, or
Yeah.
start bringing those things up in terms of the early stages of a relationship, because it can be kind of scary to feel, I guess,
Sure.
rejected or
Oh, yeah.
judged. So like how do you even navigate that in the early stages?
Yeah. Such a great question. So, what I always like to tell people is that the best sex you have in a relationship is not going to happen in the early days. A lot of people think, oh, I want sex like it was in the honeymoon stage. And I'm like, no, you don't, because
Wow.
you're figuring each other out. You have it like the analogy I use a lot is imagine a pair of ballroom dancers who've been dancing together forever. They appear to move as one unit, and she knows when he flicks his wrist a certain way what that's signaling her body to do. There's a really deep sense of synchronicity, and that's really what people want to feel
Yeah.
during sex. You don't want to have to talk about every little thing, but you can't get to from point A to point B without some hard conversations.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people ask, well, how do I have those conversations without it being awkward?
Yeah.
And my answer to them is you don't. You lean into the awkwardness. Again,
Yeah.
coming back to what I was saying earlier, we have to be willing to go through some of these uncomfortable emotions if we're going to expect to come out on the other end and have this really great thing.
Yeah.
And in early stages of relationships, part of that is some of this exploration and conversation and negotiating and understanding, collaborating and figuring out if there's enough overlap that the two of you, are aligned enough for this to be sustainable longer term. Um, but yeah, sex in the early days can feel kind of clunky and awkward, and it can be harder for people. We know from the research, it can be harder for people to, especially for women, to have more orgasmic consistency
Right.
early on because they're still feeling a little bit self conscious and
Yeah.
insecure. The good
Yeah.
stuff doesn't come until later. And
Wow.
so I think the best way to open the door is to start by saying something like, I really love the time we've shared together. I feel like we have a great chemistry, and I want to do whatever we can to do to enhance that and make sure we're as aligned as possible. Now, I feel a little uncomfortable talking about this stuff, but I feel like hopefully there's a safe enough, level of trust
Mhm.
that I can open up to you. Would you be okay to hearing what I have to say? So
Yeah.
you've put it out there. It's awkward. I feel a little hesitant, but you're not going to judge me, right?
Yeah.
Who's going to say yes? I'm going to judge you.
Yeah.
And then you can, and they're most likely to say, you know what? Yeah, I feel a little uncomfortable too, or I've been having this thought or feeling that I've been kind of uncomfortable to bring up with you. So I'm glad that you opened the door. Most
Yeah.
people feel relieved that someone has opened the door for you both to walk through to then, talk about what you like and dislike. And then you can say, I really loved it when we did this, or, I noticed you seem kind of into that. It's not something I've really explored before, but I'd be willing to try it a little bit more. Like, what can I do to meet you in the middle, or what can I learn? Or, it's those kinds of conversations that ultimately get the ball rolling. And it's not a one-time conversation.
Yeah.
One of the five secrets that I outline in my book is adaptability. You
Mm.
cannot expect sex to be the same through every stage of life. There are going to
Yeah.
be things that happen, circumstances, whether, within yourself, your relationship, or your environment, they're going to force you to make some changes. And so you got to get comfortable talking about
Yeah.
this stuff because you're going to have to if you want to keep sex strong for the long haul.
And yeah, embrace that discomfort, I think is so key. And I love that you said that, because like this is also the thing that it's important to sit in these moments, because that defines if it's even the right partner.
Yeah.
You can't just play pretend. It's important
No.
to hit on these conversations to say,
Yeah.
and if they don't create necessarily a safe space, or they are super judgy, or does push you away, like, not saying
Red
that
flag.
this is the end of it, but it's like, well, this is a defining attribute of the early stages of relationship, to see, can I build with this
Yeah.
person, or can I even communicate? So embracing that discomfort, I think, is so important, because like I talk to women all the time through coaching and whatnot, and it's like, well, really simple questions of they play detective in their head out of the fear, and yet
Mhm.
they don't speak on anything, so it doesn't get better. And that's
Yeah,
including, the sexual intimacy. What are we? Is the situationship,
yeah,
whatever. But it's that fear of embracing that discomfort
right.
but getting through that is what's going to be able to see if I connect with you, can I build with you, which is amazing. Which I think that combo could add to the sexiness. I'm like, oh wow, we could chat. Oh wow, we
Yeah,
could connect about this. Wow, I
I
feel even more safer with you now. Whoa,
exactly. It
that's
is,
okay.
it is intimacy building to have those
Yeah,
conversations. I mean, back to my point earlier about you learn a lot about someone by asking questions about their sex life. If you bring
yeah,
that up and they shut down or they get judgmental, that's telling you a lot about who they are and what
yeah,
some of their limitations and barriers might be. And I love what you said about that being kind of a defining moment in the
yeah,
relationship because yeah, if you can't talk about it, you're going to have to figure out why that is because
yeah.
we know again from the research that sexual satisfaction is a stronger predictor of relationship satisfaction than the reverse. So if
Mm.
misaligned sexually, there's a pretty solid chance the relationship is going to suffer.
Oh wow. Okay, so this is important to bring up then, because I'm sure some people are thinking of like, well, I got to test the car before I drive it. Yet we
Yeah.
did discuss how sex can get better,
Mhm.
later on after the communication and talking. So like, how important is it as someone who maybe we don't have the best sexual chemistry early, or I guess I'll frame it this way: how important is that line of you have to test the car before you drive it? Like how much of a defining marker? Like obviously we're talking very early stages,
Yeah.
because some people have extreme sexual connection and then they
Mhm.
stay in a relationship longer because it's so strong, and then maybe the
Right.
sexual connection is not the best, but they really like the person, so they try to make it work. So I'm curious of
Yeah.
like how much merit is in that phrase, you think?
Sure. So, both sexual connection and emotional relationship connection
Yeah,
are important for the long haul. Yeah. If you have intense chemistry with someone who is not healthy for you in any other way,
yeah.
then yeah, the relationship isn't going to work. Like, if I just saw this meme that was like, just because someone is good for your whole doesn't mean they're good for your soul.
Oh, dude, I love that.
I
Oh,
know, it made me
man.
laugh. So, yeah, you can't just because you have a strong chemistry with someone, and I will
Yeah.
tell you, invariably, if you're not aligning emotionally, that will eventually filter into the sex. You're gonna feel empty, you're gonna feel discarded, you're gonna feel alone even when you're in
Yeah.
bed with them, so you're gonna feel it, it's gonna work its way in sexually eventually. Now, what you're looking for, of course, you want to be aligned in your, general values, but if one person really values sex and they consider themselves a sexual person, and sex is really one of the most important ways that they experience a feeling of love and connection and intimacy, but the other person just isn't very sexual and it doesn't do that much for them, that relationship is going to probably suffer. If one person has like a really specific kink or fetish that they can't live without, or they're never going to feel satisfied unless you're willing to accommodate that sometimes, like that relationship might suffer.
Mm.
It's rare to find someone that you match up with 100%
Yeah.
across every domain, especially sexually. There's always going to be a little bit of a difference. You just want the difference to be small enough that
Right.
it's manageable.
I love that you said that, because I was curious on how do we sustain a relationship if we are on opposition sides of, what have you. But I love that you hit on the fact that there is a realness to, like, I think one, it's imperative to explore your own sexuality for this reason,
Mhm.
and to like be like, oh, this is something I could live without, or maybe I could do every once in a while, or versus this is my thing and I need this if I'm going
Yeah.
to be with a person for my entire life. Like,
Yeah.
it's necessary to kind of dive into this when in a sense of self to kind of manage that expectation in the relationship. And I love that you hit on like there's a real world in terms of the dysfunction of that intimacy. If you guys inherently are on two different sides and believe that,
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
can this survive? And it is very important to give the merit to that conversation, because I think a lot of people, it's easy for them to kind of push that off, but it's, if it feels like it's under the rug or in the closet, then
Mhm.
that's just going to build and build and build
Yeah.
eventually. So I love
And
it. I
I
like
think
that you
where a
brought that
lot of couples get stuck in that domain is that both men and women are kind of brought up or socialized to think that sex for a man is about getting off and that sex isn't important to women.
Yeah.
But of the heterosexual couples that I see in my office, when a heterosexual guy is talking about wanting more sex, it's because that for him is an opportunity to feel loved and
Yeah.
connected and to experience intimacy. But he wasn't brought up to think that. So he doesn't communicate it like that to
Yeah.
his partner. So she's over here thinking, well, all he cares about is having sex because she's not making the link that
Yeah.
sex is also about love for him, or that it could be about that for her. A lot of women, likewise, are brought up to think that, they are sexual objects or that there's nothing in it for them when it comes to sex. And so I have to do a lot of work with both men and women in helping them see that sex and love are very much aligned and that it's
Mm,
kind of the ultimate expression of love to share
yeah.
yourself emotionally and physically with another person who you care about. And I
Yeah.
think when we change the way we think about it, we can a lot of times find that there's more overlap than difference.
Love that. I love it because that is always like what you hear is like, oh, one person wants it all the time and I just don't feel like it. I'm like, well, you're rejecting me. And then I feel like we're not connected. And like there's anxiety now that I have. And it, if anything, it could build more longer bridge away from each other. It could create this distance, with
Yeah.
that proper dynamic of communication. But there's this inherent need that I love you and I want to feel more connected with you. That is kind
Mhm.
of to lean on. I guess I'm curious is like how much does like attachment style play into this? Because
Mhm.
we hear about attachment style a lot. There's this dismissive and then there's anxious and all that. And personally I think I had a real realization about this of, early stages I'm
Mhm.
hollering, I'm like, what's up, girl, let me holler at you, Mr. Sexy
Yeah.
Time McGee. And then
Yeah.
once I am in a serious vulnerable relationship, it's a flip. It's like hard for me to initiate. And I think
Yeah.
what drove me crazy, it's not like I don't want it, but it's I have this fear of, and they're always initiating, and that's a problem because I
Right.
should be doing it too. And plus, I'm a dude. But I think I realized there's this fear of rejection. And
Yeah.
now that there's this vulnerability with this person that I love them, and if I
Yes.
now approach them and I get rejected, that's going to hurt me.
Right.
And that took some work to kind of dig into.
Yeah.
Versus early on, I'm like, people pleaser McGee trying to win you over.
Yeah.
I like you, but I don't love you. Like you can't hurt
Right.
me.
It's surface.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
surface. So I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah. So and then a lot of my partners are like, Eli, what's going on? Like we're in
Yeah.
it now. You know what I
Where'd you
mean?
go?
Where'd you go? So I'm curious in terms of like, yeah, how much does that like attachment style play into that? Like kind of just human beings in general. I don't know if they have any thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, attachment style plays in a really big and profound way.
Yeah.
Um, so Sue Johnson did a lot of work around this and
Mhm.
identified different ways that attachment style shows up sexually. And so for anxious attachment people, she calls it they have oh gosh, hang on, there were three S's. So for avoidant attachment, it's sealed off sex. Okay. So
Sealed
they're
off.
kind of sealed off emotionally. Sex can be more about just getting off. They have a difficult time making eye contact during
Mhm.
sex. It can be very performative. Let me show you what a man I am, or
Yeah.
let me show you how crazy I can be in the bedroom rather
Yeah.
than, kind of going into it from a more vulnerable emotional place. So that's sealed off sex. People who have an anxious style of attachment have what she calls soulless sex. So they're using sex as a way to feel affirmed in the relationship. So because they feel insecure in the relationship, having sex makes them feel loved and wanted. But a lot of times they don't have as much orgasmic consistency, or they can have
Mhm.
other sexual issues show up because of the anxiety that spills over into that. And a lot of times still feel kind of anxious and empty even after a sexual experience because of the anxious attachment. And then people who have a secure attachment, she says, have synchronous sex. So they kind of feel like they're moving at one unit. They feel more comfortable to explore things. In fact, I think it was her that said something like, the more securely you are attached, or the more if you can't let go and enjoy a roller coaster unless you trust that you're securely buckled in. It was something like
I
that.
love that. Oh,
I
wow.
know, I
That's
know.
great.
So it's not really unless you feel secure that you feel the freedom to explore. And so people who have more secure attachments are having the best sex because not only do they not shy away from the
Wow.
vulnerable emotional stuff, they also trust that their partner isn't going to judge them if they say, "Hey, let's try X, Y, and Z." Like they're a team, they're a unit. And so, yeah, attachment styles definitely play into how we show up and express ourselves sexually.
Girl, I'm saying girl. Sorry, you're a whole ass doctor. Doc, you are blowing my mind right now. This is
No worries.
the whole
Mhm.
I love that roller coaster analogy because it's such an important example of do I
Yeah,
trust this person? Like do
right.
and there's a lot of people that like we run into these relationships without even really like, do I know them? Can I rely on them? Can I trust in them? Can I confide in them? Like,
Yeah.
and more so we the first level is just we want them to want us,
Mhm.
and that once it comes to that level of vulnerability and intimacy, that could really, like what you're saying, could really play a part in that. So I love that you hit on that because I know someone's listening that like had to put their coffee down and be like, oh shit,
Yeah.
maybe I don't
It
trust his ass, I don't know.
yeah.
Like I feel like this does not feel like a safe roller coaster. There's no seatbelts on this. I
Right.
want to, you hit on something that's really important. Like you hit on something called flow state. Now, because I know we hit on like the synchronizations,
Yeah.
but talk to me about this flow state and how it relates to that sex.
Okay. So this is like my favorite topic. So, I had been working as a sex and relationship therapist for about a decade or so.
Mm,
And I could help people obviously overcome things like ED, or help
mhm,
women have orgasms or get over the pain they were experiencing during sex. I could help couples who had low desire, discrepancy in desire. But I noticed that a lot of people would come back just longing for more. And they would say
mm,
things like,
mm,
"Oh, I want what I had in the honeymoon stage." And I would remind them that that's not sustainable. And long story short, as I asked them more questions about what they wanted to feel during sex, they would use words like effortless. I want to lose myself in the moment. I want to forget the world around me. And it clicked that they were using words that people use when they are describing a flow state. So, for people who don't
mm,
know what that is, flow is a term that was coined like decades ago by this psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And he noticed that when people were in a flow state, they were engaged in activity in which they have total absorption or a sense of unity or merger with whatever they're doing. Think of a surfer who feels at one with the wave, like
mm,
space and time kind of disappear. You feel totally absorbed and lost in the moment. So I'm like, okay, people want to experience flow during sex. That makes sense. Like, I get that. So I turned to the academic literature to see what I could find. And there was not one study out there that looked at the relationship between flow state and sexual satisfaction, which was
huh,
just shocking to me because I'm like, this is what people want to feel. And even that psychologist, he talked a little bit about sex in his books, but not a ton. So I initiated a study, and I got like 100 couples who were in longer term monogamous relationships because I wanted to rule out people who were just having honeymoon stage sex. They
yeah,
had to be over the age of 25 because I didn't want it
okay,
purely hormone driven. They couldn't have just had a baby or be pregnant because that can throw a wrench into things. And I gave them a couple questionnaires looking at how sexually satisfied they were overall. And then I asked them to reflect on one of the better sexual experiences they had, and asked them to answer some questions about whether or not they were experiencing flow. And in support of my hypothesis, people were far more likely to have high levels of sexual satisfaction if they were experiencing a flow state during sex. And so then I took the people with the highest scores and I called them up and I conducted these, I mean, hours on the phone with people to find out exactly what they were doing to get
wow,
into a flow state during sex. And after going through all the data and interviews, I noticed several themes emerge. So, and that's what my book is about. So it's the five
yeah,
secrets to create connection and cultivate passion. So we've got sensuality, curiosity, adaptability, vulnerability, and attunement. And then woven through those five secrets is the science of flow and how to experience a state of flow during sex. And it turns out it's not as hard as you think.
That's
You
good to know. That because this
Yeah.
flow state, I'm like, I'm down. What roller coaster is that? I'm about that life. I feel like there's a splash zone at some point in this roller coaster. That sounds
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah. So this is not hard to achieve
No.
and dive into. Okay.
No, and I think that's what's so great about this book is, I took this concept of flow that a lot of
Yeah.
people are familiar with. Most people can think of something that puts them into a flow state, whether
Yeah.
it's getting on a runner's high or playing an instrument or a sport where they get into it's being in the zone. So they're like, okay, like I know that feeling. And then you think about the things you do to get into that feeling with whatever it is you do, and you start applying those same things to sex. And the book is
Wow.
about how to do that.
So I should like, okay, I should just be playing like my trombone right before getting it. Like I'm just naked playing the trombone in front of her because that gets me in the zone.
That
Take some
that's not
pre-workout.
the path
Okay.
necessarily. That's not the but if you think about the steps you take to play
Yeah.
the trombone,
Yeah.
you have to spend time. You didn't learn how to play the trombone overnight. You
Right.
probably had to take some lessons.
Yeah.
There was a struggle phase, and every time you pick it up, you might have to tune it a little bit. It's not like you pick it up and you lose yourself right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 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 Yeah, we got to do some tuning. I'm like, what's up, girl? What you want to like?
Mhm.
Let's tune this up real quick. Okay, yeah, I feel it. All right. I
Mhm.
think that's such a remarkable view of that, and it's so beautiful. You've done such intentional research to back all this, and
Yeah.
it entirely shifts our psyche in terms of like that process of getting us into that moment with someone that we care about. It's like we think it's just like, all right, take pants off, let's just jump in because we have to,
Right.
or we have to check this box or whatever. But that's
Yeah.
pretty fascinating.
Oh,
I
yeah,
love
I
that.
mean, anything there's flow doesn't happen because you decide it's gonna happen. There's
Yeah.
4 phases of flow, and the first one is the struggle phase. I mean, think of a
Uh-huh.
surfer has to paddle out and, like, sit around until a good wave comes, or a painter has to mix their oils and get the right shades and hues before they put paintbrush to canvas. There's a little bit of prep, and you might feel kind of frustrated initially, but you got to give yourself time to then
Yeah.
let those stress chemicals work their way out and the feel good chemicals work their way in.
Oh, that okay. And I'm trying to be as like as what is it, mature as possible with this conversation. But with all these examples you're saying, I'm like, that's what she said. I'm like, yeah, sometimes you gotta put those oils in the paint and mix it up a little bit.
There
You're making
you
it way too
go.
easy, doctor. You're making it way too easy for me
Yeah.
here. It's like you gotta, tune it up. You gotta paddle out a little bit, you gotta, break a
Right.
sweat with those paddling before you hit that
Right.
wave. I'm like, yeah,
Exactly.
you do.
Yes,
Yeah.
you do.
So everyone that's listening, do not worry. There will be a link to this book. There is a link, right? We could grab
Yep.
this
Oh,
book, please. Sweet,
yes.
sweet. There will be a
Yes.
link in the show notes so everyone could grab this freaking book because I need to get this flow going. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's fantastic. Thank you for
Yes.
sharing that. And I think that's such a beautiful
Absolutely.
psyche behind it. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, get the book, pre-orders mean everything to authors, so buy
True.
it before it comes out, and,
True.
hang on to your receipt and visit my website because people who show proof of purchase get tons of free bonuses, so there's not a good reason not to buy it, like, you're gonna get so much more than just the
Look
book,
at that.
so
Let's go. Blessing on blessings. Are you serious? You get to read the book,
yeah,
get hyped, you get to understand this flow state, and
yes,
I get to work with you on a deeper level. That's amazing.
yes,
I I
exactly.
I, I did have a question though, real quick. Cause I know we're diving into like, diving into these relationships and having these conversations and like embracing this uncomfortability and these flow states, which are all so important. I'm curious though of like when is it a need to see you? Like I'm in a relationship, it's been
Uh,
long term. Like when do me and my partner like when do we know it's time to maybe grab that book or reach out to you or
ah.
work with you? Like when do you think that's a good time to do that?
I mean, get the book before you think you need it because
Right,
it
right.
will help you, circumvent a lot of problems. I mean, I want this book to be like a part of sex ed
I
because
love
I think
that.
if people knew this stuff, when they're younger, then they could avoid a lot of heartbreak and headache down the road. So get the book before you need it. And then if after that, if you feel like you're applying the tools and you really care about each other, but
Yeah.
maybe some of your old trauma is coming up, or you're having a hard time recovering from some relationship conflict, or you both want to align more sexually, but there just seems to be a disconnect and you can't quite get there, then yeah, reach out to a therapist
Yeah.
because, we are trained to help people
Mm.
overcome this stuff. And I do that every day. So don't give up hope. And, there's a lot of options I think out
Yeah.
there for people.
And I love that you exist. And I love that you've done this work. And I love that you're assisting so many people and we're changing this psyche. And it's great to know that there are people like you that this relationship doesn't have to end. We could have a space to explore and to mediate these conversations and hopefully come to a place of sustainability and comfort and do it for as long as you need, and maybe you could develop a new relationship with yourself and with your partner in this
Yeah,
beautiful
I mean,
intimate way.
in the research, and not just my research, but other people's research, couples who sustained really high levels of sexual satisfaction for the long haul, most of them had done therapy at some point
Wow.
or taken a workshop at some point. Like learning is always a part of the process when you're
Yeah.
growing.
Yeah.
So, we got to remove the stigma and taboo from therapy, and we're here to help each other.
Doctor, it's been phenomenal chatting with you.
It's
Again, I love the work that you do, and I love how, again, how amazingly you share this to the masses. And everyone's going to see this book. We're going to pre-order it. It's going to be amazing and fantastic. But what are some ways that we could follow you? Be there for you, learn more about you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm on all the social media channels at Dr. Emily Jamia. That's Dr. Emily Jamia. As I mentioned, there's tons of resources on my website, which is emilyjamia.com. I also have a podcast. It's called Love and Libido. So if you like me, go check it out.
Love it. So everyone else, you know how to follow her, this amazing, fantastic human being. Thank you so much. You dropped some
Thank you.
heaters, girl. I'm
Well,
trying to figure out my
yeah, no,
experience.
it's been so fun. I'm always excited talking about this, but I love your energy. It makes me even more fired up about this issue that I'm so passionate about. So thank you.
I'm putting this on my resume. Dr. Emily said likes my energy. So I'm gonna put it on.
I do.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The Self Hype Podcast.